Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks. This time we've got the pleasure of watching Toby02 playing in his T110E3. This is one of the two top-tier American tank destroyers in the game. There's the T110E3 and also the T110E4. Now it's very important that you know the differences between these two vehicles. If you don't, it's really going to be the matter of you either dying or not. Now, the key difference is that the T110E3 that Toby is driving does not have a traversable turret. And so that means the weakness of this tank is getting its flank and taking out its rather mediocre side armor. Whereas the T110E4 has a turret that can turn 90 degrees to the left and 90 degrees to the right. Also, the T110E3 is much less mobile than the T110E4. It's got a worse track traverse speed, it's got a worse top speed, it's just overall more vulnerable to being outmaneuvered. So that is your key to taking out this tank. However, you might be wondering, well, what's the advantage of the T110E3 then? Well, the advantage of the T110E3 is that it has a much better rate of fire. It fires basically a half an extra round a minute. Its rate of fire is just over 3.5, whereas the T110E4's rate of fire is closer to 3, which is really underwhelming for a tier 10 tank destroyer that has 750 alpha damage. And that's right, these vehicles, along with most of the top tier tank destroyers, do 750 alpha damage per shot, with 295 millimeters of penetration. The main difference between this vehicle, with its 155 millimeter gun, and a vehicle such as the E100, with its 150 millimeter gun, they both do 750 alpha damage, but the tank destroyer variants of these guns can just cut through heavily armored vehicles so much easier than a standard AP round would on the E100. Also remember that the T110E3 has fantastic APCR ammunition with 375 millimeters of penetration, but Toby has decided to not use any in this battle. So there are a few other advantages of the T110E3 that I could just brush over. For example, this vehicle has got some of the best frontal armor in the game. You don't even have to angle it. It's absolutely wonderful. It's 305 millimeters at its thickest. There are really two key weaknesses to this tank if you want to try and engage one frontally, which I thoroughly recommend that you don't do. One is this area that you see here, this viewport. It's very flat, but it's actually one of the weaknesses of the tank frontally. The other is hitting your opponents in the lower left or the lower right plate. But I thoroughly recommend that you don't try and do this to a T110E3, because it's very likely that you're going to ricochet and he's probably not, as he pens the front of an E100 turret with that 155 millimeter gun. Now, if it was if Toby had been in an E100 there, firing at an E100 with standard rounds, not firing heat, you pretty much couldn't pen the front of an E100 there unless you got super lucky and it hit the top bar. But having that 295 millimeters of penetration that the T110E3 gets makes it a much more dangerous prospect for the enemy tier 10 German heavy tank. Toby gets quite a nice roll there for rolling for 791 to finish off a Panther 88, who I think felt quite out of his depth in this matchup. But this game is it's not going very well, even though Toby has already picked up 3,000 damage so far this game. You can see that the enemies have dominated the northern flank, and there is now a lone T-54 trying to hold back probably about 4, 5, possibly 6 tanks that could be coming from the north. And that usually happens on Arctic region. If you get into the situation where you camp in this area, usually that happens when there's artillery on the enemy team. But luckily for Toby here, there is no artillery on the enemy team. If there was, he simply couldn't do what he's doing here. He couldn't be using that fantastic frontal armor on the tank as it casually bounces that 150 millimeter shell from the enemy E100. If there was artillery, he would have likely been peppered just for the last 4 minutes that he's been sitting there. So, great map awareness here. Toby realizes that the northern flank is completely dominated. And it's unsurprising as well, as this matchup, it was pretty ugly. 30% with many decent players on the enemy team still left alive that he's going to have to contend with. But there's also one advantage to the T110E3 that I didn't mention compared to the T110E4, and that is that this vehicle gets 8 degrees of gun depression. The T110E4, I believe, gets 6 degrees of gun depression. Having 8 in the T110E3 often allows you to hide your lower plate as you engage over ridge lines and put pressure on your opponents from situations that they didn't expect you to be able to do so. I'm not sure if that T62A expected that 8 degrees of gun depression there. Many tank destroyers have to expose their lower plates, unlike the E3 does. And so that means that if you can get hull down in a situation such as this, I would be very, very, very confident with a T110E3. And having the rate of fire that you need to be able to start to cut through your opponents really is working out. Now the enemy were kind of doing the right thing here by trying to get a pincer maneuver. Obviously the best way to engage Toby's team here would be to be shooting them in the back as well as in the front. But they didn't time their advance correctly. The enemy team were too ambitious and they went all in before their forces who were in the southwest have closed the distance. And so they've lost a good number of tanks for absolutely no reason, allowing Toby and his team to be able to get back into this game. Effectively, what the enemy team needed to do, if I just zoom out a little bit here, what the enemy team had to do to be able to try and take out Toby and his fantastic T110E3 here in this position was to attack from this way as you saw them. But they mistimed it. Look how many tanks they've lost. They've lost 3 vehicles. Make that 4 vehicles with a T-34 also now firmly very, very, very close to death. Now pushing in here is a very good idea, but it is not a very good idea unless you have pressure coming up from this flank. And as we can see, it's only now that the Jagdpanzer E100, a serious threat, as well as that Leopard prototype, as well as that Mouse, and an E100 that's going to appear here, that have reached. But now there's nobody on the other flank to help them out. And so what that means is that Toby and his team can turn their tanks around now. They're not flanked. In fact, the enemy team totally mistimed their advance. And so there's never been a flanking situation in this game. And so that means frontally armored beast tanks like the T110E3 can show you exactly what they're capable of. Now Toby here aims for the cheeks of the Mouse. Good shot there. That is a weak point. If the Mouse is not angling his cheeks, it's quite an easy shot to make with the 295mm of penetration that Toby has. The E100 bounces a heat round off his vehicle, and Toby puts a good shot there into the lower plate of the Mouse. He's up to 8,600 damage, but he hasn't been the most accurate this game, and so he's only got 1 AP round remaining. Who is he going to choose to use it on? Looks like it's time to thin out the health points of the Jagdpanzer E100 a little bit as he puts one in, and then I like what he does here. He gets close to the AMX CDC to avoid a shot from the Jagdpanzer E100. Unfortunately, he couldn't stop the heat round from the E100 going through his side armor, but the Jagdpanzer E100 misses his shell, and Toby fires a high explosive round, his last few remaining shells of the tank, into the enemy E100, who's insisting on flanking him. Good aggressive play there by the E100. Unfortunately for him, he gets lit up by the E100 on Toby's team and burns to death. Now this Jagdpanzer E100 is outnumbered. Toby comes around the corner and puts a 444 damaging high explosive shell into the lower plate of the Jagdpanzer E100 there, showing you why it is a good idea to take a fair few high explosive rounds in this tank. And finishing him off with 231 damage to the lower plate. These high caliber, high explosive rounds certainly are fantastic for taking out opponents that are maybe only exposing super thick armor, or a side scraping, or alternatively just have very little armor indeed. Remember that if you're able to penetrate these rounds with their 90mm of penetration, they do 1,100 damage. I've certainly had a lot of fun firing these Waffenträger Alpha E100s as an example, who certainly don't expect you to shave off half of their health with a single shot. So Toby has managed to grind his way through the enemy team, and now there is a remaining Bat Chat left. He has done over 10,000 damage and picked up 4 kills. He's played this very well indeed. He had great awareness, and this is the kind of gameplay that you can expect from the T123. It's not fast enough to get into position to make any flashy plays. It's all about just doing the right thing at the right time with your lack of mobility. Now Toby is trying to get up onto the slope here. I like this idea. If he manages to get the slope, he can keep a distance. But unfortunately, the enemy Batchat appears. Luckily, the Batchat bounces his first shell off Toby's tank, who decides to press his advantage. He's got 3 shells remaining. Can he pen the high explosive round on the Batchat? 90 millimeters of penetration. He's got a very good chance of going through him. Oh dear, it only tracks him, 446. But he turns his armor in here, hiding his lower plate. But unfortunately, the Batchat sees his opportunity to flank the reloading T123. And this means that the Batchat has got his flank. He bounces, and Toby... he finishes off the Batchat, but he actually manages to kill himself as well with the splash on his 155mm high explosive round. What a fitting end for a fantastic carry that Toby put off here. When I saw this replay for the first time, I simply couldn't believe it. I had to re-watch it a second time. Toby certainly decided that he wanted to have some mutually assured destruction here as he took out that dastardly Tier 10 French medium tank at the end of the game. And as we can clearly see, he crossed swords until the end. And I think this is a fantastic moment with his Mark of Excellence crossing with the 2 marks of excellence on the Batchat. So while this replay was predominantly to showcase the fantastic round that Toby had here, I also wanted to highlight a couple of things about Arctic region, namely this corner. How many of you guys have been in a game where the enemy team have literally just camped here? It's been very, very hard to dig them out. We saw this game lost by the statistically stronger team with some very experienced players because they mistimed their movements. This game would have been an assured victory if the team that was coming in from the northwest teamed up with these players towards the southwest and caught them in a pincer maneuver. I think it was a case of the team getting overconfident and greedy. All they had to do was to hide in the ridge lines here, go hold down, and then wait for the slow advancing heavies and tank destroyers to make their way to here. From then, they could try and attack out. To counter people camping in this location, you really want to have 1 or 2 tanks located here. Generally, what you'll find is the enemies try and push around, turn their turrets to the side, and then hopefully you can get some crossfire with gentlemen that might be located over in the hold down locations, such as here, or alternatively in locations over here. When tanks are camping in one location, it is so important that you engage them from multiple angles. Every single tank in the game is designed to be at its most dangerous when it's engaged frontally, and so to counter this, try and surround your opponents from multiple angles if they're in a very tricky dug-in position to force them to turn their turrets, and therefore you should be able to gain shots into the side of the turret which is weaker, or hopefully the side of the hull armor which is generally even weaker still. So advancing along here using this route to end up in this location will enable you to take out your opponents most effectively. But let's just take a quick look at the post-game stats to see how the real hero of this battle performed. So Toby received 115,000 credits this game, and because he didn't fire any APCR rounds, that's nearly a 50,000 credit profit in a tier 10 tank. Toby also received 4,558 experience for his double. That's 1,519 base, which is huge for a tier 10 tank. And for his 11,000 damage, he picked up a high caliber medal and also a Confederate, as well as 5 kills. In fact, Toby did damage to 13 out of 15 vehicles on the enemy team. And you certainly know you've had a crazy game when you see yourself turn up on the enemy damaged list. The super heavy frontal armor of the T124 was also able to block nearly 4,000 damage this game. And I wouldn't expect anything else from the T123. It is just that damn good frontally. And Toby, thank you so much for sending me this replay. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and hopefully you guys did as well. If you did, please consider giving this video a like down below. It really helps the channel out. And if you want to see another monstrous T123 replay, then simply click up here and you can go through to a game by Trios92, where he fights to the death on the streets of Runeberg. And let me know in the comments down below, what is your favorite tier 10 tank destroyer and why? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.